So I am going to get started. I'm going to share my screen. And so if you want to say something, just unmute yourself. Otherwise, probably mute yourself just because to keep background noise out of the way. This is me and David, so you have contact information. Of course, you will have access. We will send you this PowerPoint afterwards, and you'll have a chance also to get the recording if you want it, and the resource list that hopefully we will all be generating together. So the plan for today is to take this hour to, first of all, draw on the wisdom of some of the relevant ecological principles and education for sustainability principles, because at the end of the day, I always start there. What wisdom can we draw on for any conversation? We're going to reflect on what we want to preserve and what needs to change. Learn from some sustainable businesses and municipal initiatives that David's going to share with us, and then generate some dialogue amongst ourselves. So that is the plan. Always good to remember what we're talking about. Given the people that are on the screen, we probably don't have to keep saying this again and again, but if you share it with somebody, I think it's useful as a one-liner just to remember we're really talking about building the capability to thrive over time. And the context that we're all operating in is schools and communities learning and working together for a sustainable future. And we know that that looks like everybody thinking, innovating, collaborating, talking candidly, improving their capabilities, self-correcting, and making personal commitments to a shared future. And more schools and communities are doing this. I wouldn't say we're at a critical number yet, but it's not so foreign to people anymore, since we have all the children and young people with us, and they live in the places in which we live and work. So the first question we're going to use this cool little tool on is, what do we want to preserve and restore? So think for a second, and we're going to ask you to actually participate in this. And in a minute, I'm going to let Atia share her screen and walk us through doing this. It's really cool. But the first thing I want to just have everybody think about is what we actually want to preserve or restore in our lives, in our communities. What are some of the concrete things that we want to stand the test of time? So think for a second. I'm going to stop sharing so that Atia can start sharing. And you can make some notes for yourself. And then what we're learning is that keywords, single words, or if you have two words, just string them together like they were one word, and then it'll show up properly on the screen. So take a moment. We're in no hurry. What do you want to preserve or restore? What do you want to stand the test of time? So go ahead, Atia, tell them where to go.
So if everyone, you can take your phones, you can take your laptops, but you just go to sift.ly. You just type that into your internet browser on your phone, on your laptop. It's no .com, it's just sift.ly. And then once you are there, you enter your code, which is E69Y.
Interesting. Nice. Keep going, take another minute. There's no end to the possibilities. Okay, another 30 seconds. Excellent. So the good news is everything we want to preserve or restore, or both, looks like it's perfectly sustainable and regenerative. Whew. That's good news. Not that I was at all worried, but that's almost always, actually it's always what happens when we ask a question like that. What really matters to people? Nothing that really matters is anything we need to lose or compromise. So that's the good news. And it'll be wonderful to have this. Okay, Atia, can you, okay, so now I'm going to share my screen again. Does anybody want to say anything about that list? I don't know that there's anything to say about it yet, but if anybody wants to say anything, we can go back to it. Okay. So towards the end of this session, we're going to talk about what needs to change and what we want to stop doing and what we want to start doing. We like to frame everything around the mental models for a sustainable future because we know that thinking drives behavior and behavior causes results. And so it's really important at this time, I think, for everybody we're working with to assume that a healthy and sustainable future is possible. And also the two that I've pulled out for this one are these two, that it's possible and that we need to understand and operate within the physical laws and ecological principles. They're non-negotiable. Everybody on this call probably already knows that. But it's still apparently not well understood by most people, what those operating instructions are and how we can operate within them. So one of them, and I promise to draw on some of them as a framing for this session for what we can do. We're in an extremely disruptive moment right now. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works in nature, and then what we can, how we can use that as an opportunity to move forward. So this is one of the core principles of life that we have discovered when you look at a lot of the science literature of the core principles. Life organizes towards life is one of them. And it's always important to remember and I like to always draw on and reinforce things that I've done before and bring in new things each time. That way we have a little bit of grounding to take it to the next level. So it's always useful, I think, to remember that it's not easy to sustain anything on this planet, but it is possible to contribute to the regenerative capacity upon which our lives depend. 0.1% of the species have been doing it for a long time, the bees and the horseshoe crabs and many other species. And so it's important to remember that. We could be a contender in this area of thriving over time on this planet. Another thing that we want to, especially these days, remember is that diversity is not something we should be teaching kids to tolerate. It is what makes complex life possible on the planet. And it's a really different way of approaching diversity than mostly what I see. Whether you're talking about biological diversity or cultural diversity or any other kind of diversity, it not only is a beautiful thing, but it makes life possible, at least complex life, if you don't want to live in a world of muck and cockroaches. The greatest potential of any living system, the optimal state, is in a state of dynamic equilibrium or dynamic stability. And whether that's an ecosystem or our brains or any living systems, the ultimate state for potential is that state of dynamic stability. And that's useful to remember, coupled with the notion of appropriate disturbances creating the next cycle of life. So life is full of both striving towards stability as well as huge disruptions that create the next cycles of life. And I think most of you know the history of the planet, that we've been through 5 near extinctions and something always made it. And so these disruptions we're experiencing provide an opportunity to create the next cycle of life that we want to create. We know the situation has been unsustainable, and this is an opportunity to use these disruptions for the future we want. Again, I remind you that what seems appropriate in the moment, if it's your car in the lava, or if you're the one that is sick, or if you know people that are sick, it may not seem like an appropriate disturbance, but that is the way life works. Stability, disturbance, and new life forms. And that's just the way it is on this planet. Creativity, which Fritjof defines as the generation of new forms, is a key property of all living systems and contributes to nature's inherent ability to sustain life. So it will require the generation of new forms, that's for sure. And whatever we want to preserve or restore will require new forms and change. This is another core principle that I think is useful in this moment. Communities, networking, co-evolved patterns of organizations and strategies, fitting in, making change, stabilizing and creating. This is the theme right now: stabilizing, creating, activating, restraining. This is what we're up against, and that's the theme of today. So driving forces. So some of you have studied systems thinking or system dynamics. There are always 2 driving forces at play. So this is a little bit deeper sense of what's going on there. You've always got your reinforcing loops that are activating, and you've got your balancing loops that are restraining. And the 2 forces are always working together over time to sustain the health of living systems on Earth. That's the way it works. Again, some of you, this is reinforcing for what you already know. Reinforcing loops seek growth or decline. More of this, more of that, more of that, more of this, or less of this, less of that, and so forth. So you can think of them as vicious cycles, or in some cases they can be virtuous cycles. More love, more hugs, more love, more hugs, more hugs, more love. That's a virtuous cycle. Then there's always the balancing loops. They are goal seeking, and the goal for the balancing loop is balance. That is that stability. It's the restraining force that keeps life in that dynamic equilibrium. There is no such thing as an unlimited reinforcing loop. So that's a good thing. So whether it's growth or decline, whether it's going well or not, there's always a balancing loop. And it's important to remember that no matter whether it's time, energy, resources, space, patience, carrying capacity, there's always a balancing loop. And so we want to look for those restraining forces and balancing loops if things are starting to get out of whack in the wrong direction. And that's what makes small shifts in one thing produce big shifts in everything. And so as we're thinking about what we want to preserve and what we want to change, I think it's really useful to remember this one. It's a systems thinking principle that we're looking for leverage here. And this disruption provides a space for us to find the leverage in the systems of which we're a part. And this one, what I want to really focus on is us and concretely thinking about what we're going to do for real. So this is, these principles and frameworks are really useful as contexts, but we have to do something with them. And that's the focus of today. So most of you have seen this diagram, which is the new model for how we see, and we all know all models are wrong, but some are useful, how we see the relationship between the economic and social systems and the living systems upon which all life and all production depends. We put that economy in the middle because it's the system most dependent on the other systems. So you're all familiar with that one. That is David's cue. Because I thought it would be useful for us to see what the business community and what municipalities are doing right now, what they've been doing in the sustainability sphere, but also what they're thinking about right now in this current set of disruptions that we're living through. So David, take it away.
Great. Well, good to be with you all today. So as Jaimie mentioned, I'll sort of take you through a little bit of the perspective from the business community. And so Jaimie, go ahead and do the next one. And, part of, the formation of the work that I've taken on over the last 10 years, starting something called the American Sustainable Business Council, was really, understanding, and asking the essential question of why aren't we making more progress towards the things that make common sense, responsible behavior, addressing climate, addressing, inequity, etc. And often the argument that you see that's being made, particularly whether it's in the halls of Congress or state legislature or the like, is that there's a business case that's made against it. If we move away from fossil fuels, we'll kill the economy and kill business and kill jobs. If we pay people higher wages, it will destroy business and destroy the economy. These arguments have been made over and over again. And what we recognize was that there was an opportunity to think differently about this, and that maybe we needed a new tool in the toolbox, which was to get responsible business, engaged, in this work, and so, based on some of the thoughts that Jaimie has been sharing, the sort of idea of, what do we want to aspire to, what's the world that we want to create, how do we think about the commons, how do we think about our collective responsibility, and then applying that, to the business community in general, so that we're thinking about, the implications of, our business. One of our founding businesses is Seventh Generation, and they borrowed that name from the Iroquois Confederacy for thinking 7 generations into the future. And how do you apply that, when you think about the business community and the like? So That's part of the work that we've actually been taking on in terms of changing the thinking, changing the narrative, and then putting business to action, both internally and externally. So if you go to the next one. So, part of what is taking place now is a conversation you might have seen emerge about sort of the stakeholder economy versus the shareholder economy. Part of the problem that we're confronting in terms of the system that we're operating with, it's Wall Street driven. It's short-term profit at all costs. It's that, right? You buy your stock, you turn it over quickly, you make a profit, right? But it doesn't think about, what we're articulating is the next way to really build a new economy, which is to consider the implications for the earth, for all other human stakeholders and the like. So how does it impact my employees? How does that impact, my community? So the actions that we take as a business, have repercussions, often what we call sort of externalized repercussions, where we're passing along, so if we pollute, we're passing that along to someone else to figure out how to clean up, and we don't bear the cost, as opposed to internalizing it, where business starts to think about the impact on all the stakeholders and begins to change their business culture, their business practices, their internal policies, and the like, in order to sort of get us to a new way of thinking about the role of business in society. So we can go to the next one. And so the other piece that was crucial to the formation of the American Sustainable Business Council was the understanding that it's not enough for businesses to just green their business, right? Produce another nice, sustainable, green, safer product. That's crucial and the like. But what's happened, right, is that whether it's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or some of the trade associations like the American Petroleum Institute or the American Chemistry Council, they became the monolithic voice in the media, in the public's view, in the halls of Congress, in the White House and the like. So what we proposed was that it wasn't enough to just do good things and do them, internally, but that businesses actually have a responsibility to actually step up and be at the table as responsible businesses to ensure that the rules, that the policies that, that are created are actually not only, compatible with the responsible culture and positions and missions that these businesses hold, but is actually one that is going to give us comprehensive systemic change. So showing up as another part of their responsibility is show up for decision making and bring this sustainable business perspective. Demonstrate how your businesses can make this happen. Next. So what we've done is built the American Sustainable Business Council as a council of business organizations and individual companies, like some of the companies that you see here. But the way that we thought differently about this is, if we're going to get to power and have a strong enough voice, we need to get to the numbers. And the way that we get to the numbers was by bringing together in our strategy multiple business organizations, whether it was B-Lab that does the benefit corporations, or Green America Business Group, or the Social Enterprise Alliance, or the micro enterprise organizations, or women-owned businesses, or or minority-owned business. All these different networks of businesses, we started to bring them in together so collectively we could have an aggregated voice and power to influence change. And the idea being, then we added the brands, because people that, if I said, it's the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce or the National Latino Farmers and Ranchers, that doesn't translate as quickly as it does if I say Eileen Fisher, Patagonia, New Belgium Brewery, etc. and the like. So the strategy is really about bringing forward this business voice to engage in policy and engage in the systems change work, as we then can shift the markets and shift the way that business is actually viewed in society, particularly in the age of Citizens United, where corporations all of a sudden became people, which is not, as Ben and Jerry say, Ben, I'm a person, Jerry's a person, Ben and Jerry's is a corporation, and those are two separate things, and corporations have a different set of rights and a different set of responsibilities, and they're not the same. So this translation into this present day world of a mobilized force of businesses in order to help usher in the new paradigm is what's central to, part of the tools that we think are important in the toolbox. Go to the next one is great. So the other piece that's really important to this thinking is that, as you think about education, you think about the interdisciplinary implications of the work that you do. We're trying to think about that in the context of the opportunities for change and what role business could actually play in shifting this around. So if, it's dealing with plastic and dealing with waste, and how do we turn those into opportunities to think differently about what we produce, let alone, how we then move those into, a circular economy type perspective. How do we think about transportation, water systems, how we treat our employees, fair trade, safer chemicals and supply chains. So what we try to do is we build these campaigns around each of these individual areas, but we hold them in the context of the larger system and the context of a regenerative, sustainable economy. And that's really important in each of the initiatives that we move forward to how to make those connections so that when we look at, you can go to the next slide, a set of different initiatives that we've just launched really in the last 6 months or so, building off of these campaigns. They're more comprehensive. They're more, so making an economy work for all is an initiative that we have. We've brought together about 50 different organizations to think about what are the top policies that we need to bring forward as we look towards the next election. So we're in the midst of producing these and having conversations with the Democratic National Committee, trying to have conversations with the Republican National Committee, talking to the Biden campaign, so these top policies and the voice from the business community offering that lens, to a new way of actually doing business. And the like. The Save Our Economy campaign, again, bring together many different organizations to look at the present COVID pandemic moment and how do we make sure that small businesses, minority-owned businesses, women businesses, freelancers are taken care of in this context, that the system is not rigged as it often is. We saw some of the abuses, where some of these large institutions somehow portrayed themselves as small businesses and got up to $10 million. Some of them were shamed into giving it back. But so we've been putting out, policy recommendations and pushing on Congress in order to sort of move these stimulus bills, these support mechanisms, for getting the economy back on track, particularly for those businesses that are often forgotten, and then there's the, No Going Back campaign that we built. So this is a campaign where we are working with worker organizations. So the restaurant workers, the domestic workers, the others, out there. So it's a partnership between business and workers in order to say we cannot go back to the way things were, to the mistreatment of those frontline workers, to those employees that are operating at minimum wage, in the case of restaurant workers not even getting minimum wage and the like. So this shifting this completely where you can actually have workers and businesses side by side making joint statements, making joint calls for action and the like. Again, a shift in the thinking of the role of business, not siloed business owners over here and employees over here, but really understanding that there's a pathway for high road business and the like. And the fourth is really coming out of our work when we launched Businesses for a Green New Deal. This is now of the policy work is to create the economic recovery plan, in the context of the context of what the Green New Deal offered up, but providing a greater specificity around policy. Next, the other initiative, and this one I think is especially important in the context of the conversation today, was really, as we moved from some of the federal work and started to think about, some of the states and localities that were trying to think about reopening and how they could do that, it was to then gather together many, many different organizations to try and put together a set of recommendations for governors, for state legislators, for mayors, for their city council and the like to consider, so that they're not going back to the way things were, but they could use this as a moment to think differently about wellness, well-being, health and safety, to think about mobility, the transportation decisions they get to make, to think about access to communication tools, broadband, right? Particularly important, as you all know, in the context of, what's happening with online education and the like. But what we also did was to reach out to the Cloud Institute, right, and say, how about making sure that education is a component of this? This is crazy. As Jaimie, often says, when everyone's doing all this work around sustainability, they always forget to include education, particularly K through 12 education. So this is a way to sort of demonstrate then the role that education can play, in thinking about, as you're reopening the economies, thinking about what's the role of schools in this, what's the role of educators, and how can business and elected officials and educators actually work together to provide for a different path forward. In fact, that's the only way it's going to actually work, right? If the teachers, the kids, the administrators are actually on board and actually part of the actors that are moving this stuff forward. And so we tried to recognize that and demonstrate that. And again, the report is available and it's on our ASBC website, but I'm hoping also that the Cloud Institute will start pushing this out and actually engage a broader conversation. And again, if you go back to the formation of ASBC, we have all these state organizations across and local organizations across the country that I think, if requested, we could start to have a conversation with, the schools in your communities and these business leaders, and try to look at whether it's using the tool of this report on state and local recommendations for reopening the economy, or otherwise, really forging that partnership for a new pathway forward. So I think that is really our opportunity, shift this completely. So I'll stop with that.
Nice. Thank you. To me, this all sets an authentic context for us and for our students, and gives us some practical examples of how real people outside of school are applying these principles that we're teaching our kids. To me, it's always useful to have some concrete examples so we don't tend to stay in the abstract for too long. So here's David's contact information. Again, you're going to all get this. So that leads me to the next part. Again, if you have any questions, just unmute yourself. We'll do clarifying questions now, and then we're going to open it up for a generative dialogue here in just a couple of minutes. So the third mental model for sustainability that I'm going to draw on today is that we're all responsible. Monica, did anybody? I should give you a chance to actually ask a question before jumping in. Wait time, so hard. Okay. So most of you have seen this one, and you will continue to see it forever. just to remind us all that everything we do and everything we don't do makes a difference. That continues to be everywhere I go when I'm building curriculum with folks. It's the everything we don't do making a difference that continues to strike people. They just never thought of it that way. So this one has been a very popular one recently. And I do always love to bring Bucky into the conversation. So as we shift and start to think about what we're going to do, now that we know what we want to preserve and what we want to restore, thinking about what's going to change and what we can actually do about it, both as educators, as citizens, as parents, as siblings, neighbors. Bucky said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And to me, that's what ASBC is doing, and that's what we're all doing in Education for Sustainability. It is a mid-course correction. It's not business as usual, either in schools or in businesses. And so I thought it would be a good moment now to start thinking about what we're committing to as individuals, and then eventually we'll see what our social contract looks like here in a minute. So the next question that I'm going to ask for everybody to write into that little Sifley thing is what needs to change, and what do we need to stop doing, and what do we need to start doing will be the third question. So the first one that's going to come up as soon as I share my screen with Atia is, what do we need to stop doing? And this is both this is what you're going to stop doing, in addition to maybe what you're recommending others do too. But I think it's super important at this moment to make it personal and to really focus on, what am I going to stop doing? And then as we share that with each other, then we can make it a we. But there is no we without the I. So let me stop here. And Atia, over to you for the next Sifley moment. Atia? Oh, there you go. Good. All right, so what are we going to stop doing? So give you a chance to type in.
It's the exact same link and the exact same code. So if it's on your phone or your laptop before.
We're already in, you just keep going.
Yep.
Remember, it's best as keywords, single words or two words strung together. This little system doesn't do well with full sentences. Hmm. Nice. So 20 more seconds. Looks like we're about there. Beautiful. So we've made some individual choices there, and now that we've shared them, we can all learn from each other, and if there's anything on here that there's a lot of things on here I didn't think about, but I love that I will now stop doing. So we can turn it into a social contract, which is where the action is, individual and social. Okay, Atia, we're ready for what we're gonna start doing. And then I have some useful things to say, hopefully, about that, and then we'll open it up for dialogue. So what do we need to start doing? Listening is really a big one. That's interesting. Nice. All right, another 20 seconds. Nice. Thank you. So again, take a look at what's jumping, what the big ones are, and even what the little ones are. And you'll have this to study and see which ones that didn't come from you seem like things you may want to start doing. Okay, Atia, thank you so much. All right, here we go again. I think some of you have heard me say that I think we're pretty good at changing what should have been preserved and preserving what should have been changed. I truly believe that if we can get that right, and be really thoughtful about what we want to preserve and hold dear for future generations, and keep our eyes constantly on what needs to change. That's a small shift with a huge result, because it's a shift in thinking, which always seems harder than it actually is, as we all know. So a few more useful things, hopefully, to contemplate, and then we'll open it up. There are 3 levels to everything we do: what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it. And I think I would hold my recommendation is to hold those 3 levels every time we start doing something or stop doing something. Be able to quickly think about the what, the how, and the why, whether it's curriculum design or teaching and learning or just living life. This comes from the permaculture folks, and I think it's really useful to remember. Degenerative designs don't produce anything. They require inputs and then they fall apart. So stay away from those. Generative designs have productive capacity that exceeds inputs, and then they fall apart. So better than a poke in the eye, but not much better. Regenerative designs have productive capacity, replace themselves, and contribute to the reproduction of more than themselves. So every educator on this call ought to see themselves as regenerative designers, because there cannot be anything more regenerative than education, than teaching and learning, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, this is the definition of what we're trying to do with our students. And that's pretty exciting. This also comes from the permaculture folks. It's a change sequence. So as you're beginning to make personal and shared commitments, personal commitments to our shared future, these are some useful steps to take. First of all, you find your favorable conditions. And whether that's the other early adopters in your neighborhood, your allies, your fertile ground, look for where you can do something. Concentrate your resources. Learn from your mistakes, because of course we're going to make them. That's all right. Build from our successes and start small. They like to say, plant the garden where you can tend it. Start small, get it going right, make all your mistakes, and then quickly move it out. We're always, again, reminding us we're talking about schools and communities and learning individually and collectively. That is what it takes to do this work. And this is just for those of you who don't know us that well, to remind you how to get a hold of us. Also remind you that we are creating a collective. The EFS collective is for exemplars. So anybody who has units, assessments, student work samples, anything that you are finding really powerful and useful in educating for sustainability and are willing to share. We want to show people, more and more people are interested in this work, but past the early adopters, they need to see what it looks like, because they're not going to be the first on their block. So we need to be able to show them what it looks like. And I'm going to stop sharing now and open it up for a dialogue. So you can all unmute yourselves if you want, so that it's a little more fluid. I realize we're on Zoom, but let me see now. There is a chat box that everybody's moving into. Avoiding difficult conversations. So Caitlin, say something about avoiding difficult conversations. What do you mean by that? Is that what you're going to stop doing? Where did Caitlin go? She's on there somewhere. She probably walked away. So anybody that's here that feels like sharing or opening up a dialogue, go for it.
Well, I'll jump in quickly. I work for, I'm in an unusual position. I'm doing work in education and in the schools, but I work for a pretty large utility and a water utility. And so I wanted to just throw it out there. Where's the role in all of this? And I think there's a big one for the public service providers, the utilities that should be brought into the conversation, be part of the change as well. I feel like our work in Philadelphia Water Department is, but it's not the case across the country. So,
Agreed. David, do you have anything to say about that?
What I would say is, we do have a Delaware watershed initiative, that has, is brought together on New York Sustainable Business Council, New Jersey, Delaware, and folks, we have been working with the Sustainable Business Network of Philadelphia, but also the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania. And so we do have this initiative. So I'd be happy to actually connect that project to you. Richard Lawton would be the person's name. And Richard is the executive director of the New Jersey Sustainable Business Council, but he's our coordinator of the overarching initiative. So I could introduce you to him and you can go into greater detail with him and perhaps bring them into the initiative.
Are you working with other utilities around the country? Is ASBC, or do you see any other states or cities that are engaging their utilities in sustainable community development?
There's a lot of work in engaging, utilities, around energy work in particular, certainly that's where, a lot of the climate focused efforts are, it's been a big focus of folks like the Energy Foundation, funding a variety of different organizations to engage with their utilities within their locality, within their states in particular, in order to have sort of a shift in their thinking about moving towards renewables and energy efficiency, et cetera. So that has been ongoing work. It's not something that we've had the capacity to do, but there are others out there, and some of our state affiliates have taken on that work.
Nice. Nice. What else you want to talk about? Chris.
Yeah, I just have a question about like the avoiding difficult conversations, and it has me thinking about talking to people that are engaged and interested in sustainability about the role businesses have to play, and how often people have a hard time thinking differently about what a business could be, and that educating people for a shareholder mentality versus a stakeholder mentality. Does anybody have any experience or insights into that? Because that's something I'm having a hard time doing.
Yeah. So what grade level do you teach?
I have been teaching college recently. I used to teach high school, and so mainly work in that area is 9, 12.
So
and
we've written a few things on sustainable entrepreneurship and on ecological economics, and with a lot of case studies of sustainable businesses and all of this work that David described. So I would be happy to share with you, email me, and I'll share with you what we've got. But it's kids, and we've got it at the college level and at the high school level. We've got kind of two different versions, but I also teach a graduate course at the School for Visual Arts called Design for Social Innovation. And what I know is most of all my students, anybody that says they know something about sustainability, what they know about is unsustainability. They've taken many, many courses in unsustainability. They know nothing about sustainability. And that's just tragic. And case studies, storytelling is the fastest way to get kids on fire I do the opening keynote for Jeffrey Hollander's Sustainable Business course at NYU every year. And again, they come in knowing a lot about unsustainability, and this is an undergrad course. So I think the most important thing for young people is to make sure they know, look, this is completely possible, but we need to think differently, and we need to see examples of companies that are doing this kind of work and match up their thinking with what we're talking about in school. So that would be my 2 cents. Maybe somebody else has. Was that helpful?
Thank you.
Anybody else want to tackle that one? It's conversely, I would have to add, I do always have to remind people how important K-12 is, because most of the sustainable community initiatives that I come across don't ever think about engaging us. And partially, I think it's because they don't think about youth leaders and the power of young people and their leadership. And they don't think that schools can do anything differently. They kind of think we're all stuck. So that's a paradigm. That's another paradigm I'm trying to change among businesses and municipalities. So it goes both ways.
Hey, Jaimie, could I chime in on that note?
Please.
This is Caitlin Blood, sorry. My technology, amazing as it is, failed me earlier.
Oh.
But I think that's in terms of difficult conversations and trying to have difficult conversations, that's really come to the forefront. I'm a teacher at a K-5 school, and I teach agriculture in a school garden, but I'm also the equity coordinator. And I think the dynamic that I've really seen coming to the forefront, especially right now, is the importance of integrating elements of equity and discussions of systemic injustice and racism and oppression into the curriculum, into textual, rooted and grounded real life examples of how our systems work, so that children, as they grow up, to work within those and change them and discuss them and not react to them. Because right now what I see is a lot of reaction around those topics.
Yeah.
And
Yep. I wrote a stage 1 of a unit plan that we posted, and Atia is going to repost it now again, about how we can surpass self-righteousness. And it's the history and the brain science of it, and examples of times in history where we've been able to overcome it, and how to envision the world that we want. Because I too see people fighting and reacting, and I don't see as much people envisioning what kind of future we actually want with respect to equity and justice. And I think we need to be able to picture that different way so that we can move toward it. Because you can't unwire people's brains, you can only rewire. You can't undo, but you can redo. So I think I agree with you, and I think they shouldn't be that difficult. We've made mistakes. We have a lot to learn. There's a threat. The other is a threat from to our little reptilian brains, and we need to teach that. What's so scary about somebody that's different or similar? We know there's more diversity within any one culture than there is between cultures. So what is it that's so scary and threatening here? And let's just talk about it. To me, it only gets difficult when you don't talk about it. especially to kids, because they can see what's going on. So I think that's a much larger conversation. Maybe that should be the next webinar we can do together. So it is 3 minutes after, so we've hit an hour. Does anybody else want to say anything else before we close out? Okay, thank you, my friends. It's been wonderful to spend some time with you. I hope this is useful. You're going to probably want to spend some time with each and every one of those slides and just put them under your pillow and think about them and what they might have to do with what you're going to stop doing, start doing, and preserve and restore. So.